All right, good morning. Here we go with muscular physiology. So, yeah, we got muscle tissue and it's modified to undergo contraction. So the function of this muscle or this tissue is to get shorter and then return to its normal length. When we look at the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle, we're going to see that it attaches to bone most of the time, that it's striated, and that this can be controlled by your mind. So it's voluntary. You choose to lift your arm and it goes up. There's plenty of situations where we have involuntary action, but for the most part, generally speaking, that's how the muscular system works. This is I was in Amsterdam and there was the Body Worlds exhibit. So I got to see that and I took some photos there. So that's where these are from. Really cool artistic work on top of your general anatomical dissection. Characteristics. Okay, so we have excitability, contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. Excitability is that we are going to get a stimulus and then respond to that stimulus. The internal environment changes, it generates an electric current, right? And then the muscle fiber will contract. So the communicating cells on this are called neurotransmitters, and so neuro meaning nerve, and transmission. So the electrical current that excites the muscles comes from our nervous system, although our mind is what activates the cascade to start it. So we will look in detail about how the nerve interacts with the muscle. So we study muscle tissue here, but we really can't study how it works without talking about the nervous system. Contractibility, here's the contractibility going from short to long. Um, when they, or That's extensibility. Contractibility is going from long to short, so it gets shorter and thicker, right? This looks thicker and shorter than it does in this image, and it goes to about 70%. Extensibility. Okay, so this is extendability. I can extend to my normal resting state, but extensibility is then extending the muscle tissue at a stretch beyond just its normal resting length. Um, the tissue can stretch and do this without damage. All right, we got our motions, both voluntary and involuntary. Give you an example of involuntary later. Maintenance of posture. Um, so the whole time we're sitting around or standing around, our body is held in a position and our brain is unconsciously activating muscles to allow that to happen. If you're in my lab, Terry did a wonderful example of this with the soleus. He mentioned for his fun fact that the soleus, if it weren't there, you would fall forward. It's just a great example of how the body's maintaining our posture. And you're not telling your soleus, like, activate, activate, so I don't fall forward, but it's activated unconsciously. Our muscles are stabilizing our joints. So if you made it through the joint content, then you saw how joints were stabilized, and we looked at the connective tissue, the ligaments, and then those tendons also that are stabilizing the joint, right, that would be attached to the muscles. So yeah, so we generate heat with muscle contraction, and we in homeostasis we talked about how your body would begin to shiver, right, and that is the body contracting to generate heat. So you could also in turn just do your jumping jacks to produce heat. If you notice that when you stop using your muscles, like when you're sitting at the computer, you start to feel cold because you're not generating the same amount of heat that you were when you were walking around. Okay, so muscles are innervated and they receive nourishment from the blood. There's generally one artery per muscle, 1 to 2 veins, and then a nerve that's identified as the one that's going to communicate contraction. At the microscopic level, when we get into this further, we'll see how muscles are built up, and that every myofiber here, this is a myofiber, is in contact with a neuron to stimulate the contraction, to get that signal there for the command. So alongside the muscle, we have fascia, right? It's beneath the skin, so we say it's subcutaneous, and it's a layer of a connective tissue that it lines the muscle. So this is the integuments that we looked at before. So here's our skin, our dermis, and then our hypodermis below, where that fat tissue is. So you have like some layer of fat there, and then you have below here, you'll have your fascia lining before you actually get to your muscle. So that's why this slide is here. It's just that there's a labeled fascial layer here subcutaneously. Okay, so it's right there. So deep fascia is a little more extensive, and what it's doing is, as opposed to just lining and covering the muscle fibers, it's going to penetrate into the organs and the muscles. So that's where we get like deep fascia would be like, you know how the bicep has 2 heads, right? And those 2 heads are separated. Those are fascial tissue deep in between those 2 heads that allows them to both be side by side but be separate muscles. Fascia itself is richly innervated, meaning it has nerve tissue, nerve supply, and vascularized, meaning blood supply as well. More about deep fascias here. Supports, reinforces, and provides elasticity. It allows for contraction of fragile muscles to pull on a strong connective tissue sheath. So soft and fragile muscle, that's talking about on the cellular level, the characteristic of the muscle tissue. So what fascia is doing is allowing that soft tissue to pull on something that's stronger, and then that force can pull on the tendon, right, the denser connective tissue strongly, and that force is pulling on the bone strongly. We have endomysium, each muscle fiber surrounded by a fine sheath of areolar tissue, right? We kind of remember that from histology. So let's look at the endomysium. See right here how the fascia is deep inside and it is surrounding the muscle. Okay, so what I want, not muscle, but the muscle fibers in here, those little bundled packages. I'm going to just take a moment now to break this down since we have the image. And then I'll retract a statement or two. So let's begin. We have the bone, we have the tendon, becoming part of the fascia, or there's like a continuation of that to the fascial tissue. We know the fascial tissue is wrapping around the muscle, right? We talked about that. And then deep in here, we have fascial tissue also wrapping bundles of muscle fibers, right? So there's a different layer. That bundling is called a epimysium, and then when it's inside in between under here is called endomysium. All right, so we have an epimysium, epi meaning around, and an endo meaning below. So we got to talk about what's happening. What I'm trying to get to is what's happening here. Let's start at the smallest level. So at the smallest level, the muscle itself is made up of myofibrils. Those get bundled and packaged here, okay? And each one of these filaments gets bundled into a myofibril. I'm going to say it again. So the filaments are getting bundled into a myofibril, and then the myofibril, right, which is just the filaments all together, gets bundled into this next package. It's bundled by something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum and the sarcolemma. All right, so this is an extensive network, not actually bundling it, but it exists underneath the the sarcolemma bundled tissue, which exists just below the fascial endomysium. Okay, so that's what's wrapping around it. So we have our filaments bundled into myofibrils, and then we have our myofibrils bundled by these tissues, right, into the muscle fiber itself. So we get to the point we have one muscle fiber that is bundled again, right, by this epimysium into the actual muscle itself. So muscle fibers get bundled into the muscle. And now we have one muscle and it's attached to the bone. Largest one with the most amount of fibers, right, is in the biceps. Smallest one is in the stapedius, which is in the middle ear. Paramecium and fascicles. So the paramecium, again, surrounding, right? So this is the fascia that surrounds the fascicles. Let me say it again. That surrounds the muscle fiber. So the groups of the muscle fibers are called the fascicles. So it does surround the fascicles, and a fascicle being a group of muscle fibers. So here, muscle fibers grouped together, fascicle, all the fascicles together is the muscle. Let's do it again. Filaments get bundled into myofibrils. Myofibrils get bundled into the muscle fiber. The muscle fiber gets bundled into the fascicle, and then the fascicle is what gets bundled into the muscle. So I skipped that last time, so let this be the one that we write in stone, okay, for that order. And again, it's dense collagenous wrap, bundles of fascicles, surrounds the whole muscle as well. And again, the deep fascia, what its job here is doing is wrapping the muscles into functional groups. So the grouping allows it to perform its motion better. More on fascia. Subserous, sub, below. Serous is an aqueous solution. So there's some fascia that's below the serous solutions, but so we see it with lining cavities and covering organs. And here's a picture of that with the lungs. Here would be the subserous fascia. So we have fascial tissue being used to, it's like putting a bunch of stuff that works together in the same bag. All right, tendons. We've been through tendons before as far as talking about them attaching muscle to bone. The fascial sheaths continuous with it, and we remember that the tendon actually attaches to the periosteum or pericardium if it's to a not to a bone but some cartilage, right, cartilaginous tissue instead of direct attachment to bone. We're clear. Aponeurosis is just a flat, broad tendon. So we have that here and in here, and there's a aponeurosis around the wrist as well. But yeah, it's still the same kind of tissue and function, but it's got a different structure. All right, we looked at bursa before. Just remember, bursas can be these fluid-filled sacs. They can get long and be tendon sheaths. And then the tendons enclose in this in a fibrous connective tissue as well. So that tendon bundle structure is also wrapped. There's a film of synovial fluid in between, and this is allowing the tendons to slide easily. So that, like, if you're moving your hands or your wrists, there's a lot of tendon motion, but the tendons can slide easily. Sometimes you can feel tendons get stuck over bone as well. Sometimes they don't slide so easily. Tenosynovitis is just an inflammation of the sheath. Swollen sheaths build up with synovial fluid, so it gets too big, it starts to cause pain. Tendinitis is inflammation of the tendon itself, so that would be the structure. The connective tissue is inflamed versus the sheath. Stress, trauma train, exercise, all cause the bursa and tendon sheath inflammation. There are some muscles that are attached directly to bone without a tendon. The intercostals illustrates that. I mentioned subscapularis as well. Does have some. It has a tendinous attachment, but it also has some muscle fibers just attaching to the fossa of the scapula. Oh, and this is just so much fun to go through and look at all the muscles you without looking at any of this to see if what you can name before reading it. If you just look at the center of the picture, like or orbicularis oris, right? Oh, oculi, orbicularis oculi. Anyway, I'm just quizzing myself, but you can go through all this and go down and just really enjoy that, or maybe sketch it out one more time for fun. All right, all the good things to you folks, all the good things.